From the Circular Economy Studio, you're listening to the Don't Call It Sustainable podcast. Join us as we speak with organizations who use the circular economy as a tool to stimulate economic value while also regenerating natural ecosystems. It truly is the best of both worlds. Now here's your host, the co-author of The Circular Economy for Dummies, Kyle J. Ritchie.
How's it going, my friends? Welcome. This is Kyle Ritchie, the author of Circular Economy for Dummies. And on this show, we are going to speak with pros from around the world to figure out exactly how business industries like architecture, fashion, technology can become an asset to the natural world with the use of the circular economy. Specifically, the three principles involved, which are design out waste, circulate products, and regenerate natural systems. Thank you for joining in. Let's get started. If you are struggling to figure out how you can begin to incorporate deconstruction services into your business, then you need to reach out to my friend Dave Bennick with the Building Deconstruction Institute. He and his team have not only been disassembling buildings around the world for the past 20 plus years, but they can also teach you and your team how to properly disassemble buildings as a source of revenue. If you need help and guidance, check out their website at www.reuseconsulting.com. Alright, so episode number 2 is finally here, and I'm still really excited with the attention that we got from our first episode. I honestly thought that we would really only be seeing viewers from the United States and maybe the UK, which we did. But we also received, surprisingly enough, a ton of views from Canada, as well as Australia, Iceland, and Spain. So that was really unexpected. And we're here at the Circular Economy Studio even more motivated now to give this show everything that we've got. And I'm going to do my best to find some guests for the rest of the season that come from all of those other great locations who listened into the show. So, our next guest, the amazing Reniera O'Donnell, she is the education lead for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And she's been working with her team in the UK for close to 3 years now. Interestingly enough, before joining the foundation, though, she spent almost 20 years working in local government and really mastering her skills of getting things done at the local level, which is fantastic and just goes to show why she's been such a value at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So she really is doing amazing things within the circular economy industry. She's working with institutions around the world with her colleagues at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And if you don't know about them, stay tuned because you're going to want to know about them. And I'm sure Reniera will be able to do a hell of a better job describing their efforts than I can. So, with that, let's go ahead and bring her in. I'm pleased to introduce my good friend from the other side of the pond, Reniera O'Donnell.
Thank you very much, Kyle. I am equally excited as this is my first ever podcast. So,
is it really?
Oh, it is. I know.
A lot of firsts.
Let's not mess this up, shall we?
So I've met a list of people a mile long who work with the circular economy every single day and have done a fantastic job of showing the value of this amazing framework. You obviously being a perfect example of that. And so giving these examples an opportunity to rise to the top and get some of the attention that they deserve is really what my involvement has looked like with writing the Dummies book in 2021 and starting this show this year in 2022. You know, I want to help people understand, first and foremost, what the circular economy is, and then help connect them with a range of tools and information that will encourage or empower individuals and businesses to pick up on it. And I would say, in a nutshell, that's really what the Ellen MacArthur Foundation offers. But, you know, it'd be great to hear more from you on the foundation.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, we were set up with a single mission, which was to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And I guess we think we've been pretty successful in gaining huge momentum over the last 10 years. But yeah, we're really about how do we make this understandable, accessible, and applicable. Right. So yeah, I would agree with that.
And so you and I actually first made contact, it would have been at the ASHE conference.
Oh, Kyle, that was like 2019, like there's been a whole lifetime between now and then. It was a long flight. It was, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 hours, something like that. I flew into Seattle and then I had to fly north. And to be fair, I mean, I've been to the States a number of times, but that was the furthest west and north I'd ever been.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really where we got connected for the first time, was in Spokane, Washington. And I've been fortunate enough to work with you a little bit, just speaking on different webinars, especially the one that I hosted last year. So I'm a big fan of not only what the foundation does, but what you do specifically. You are very well versed in the circular economy. So I'm grateful that we've been able to work closely over the past few years. So help us understand exactly how you found yourself working at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I mean, starting from college, what was your path?
So, oh goodness, that really is a lifetime ago. So I went to school and university. College is such a US term. I went to school and university in South Africa, which is where I grew up. And I actually intended to be a doctor. Probably haven't told you that before, Kyle.
No.
Yeah, I applied for medicine and I finished school in a very transitional year for South Africa. And I unfortunately didn't fall into the right skin color actually to get into medicine. And so I got a rejection letter and then was like, oh, pants, now what do I do? And so I decided to do the first year of what I considered to be subjects that would then get me into medicine for second year. And that all went horribly wrong because I did maths, I did physics, I did chemistry and zoology and failed pretty much everything except
Oh my
zoology.
goodness.
Yeah, no, I am really not hugely intellectual. Had a great time at university. But what it did do is it led me to pick a second major in environmental and geographical science in my second year. And so my degree is really very life science based. So I have a really good understanding of natural systems, which in terms of the circular economy is hugely helpful.
Right.
But I'm not going to lie to you, I finished university and I didn't work in my science degree for the better part of the next 18 years. And I had a very checkered career through local government in the UK. I came over to the UK after I finished university because I thought, oh, I'll make loads of money and I'll take it back to South Africa and I'll do my honours in environmental and geographical science. And that never happened. I've not actually left England yet. But about 2.5 years ago, I got to a stage where I needed to do something different. And I actually had friends who work at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I have found myself living on the Isle of Wight, which is where it is headquartered. And over a very enjoyable few bottles of wine, got talking about, well, I mean, you did ask, got talking about the circular economy and how I found it really fascinating. And at the time, I was actually working on a local project here on the island and thinking through how there's no university here where I live, but we all know that universities bring with them like amazing economic regeneration, and they bring young people and lifeblood and research into an area. We've got lots of what we call in the UK tertiary education, so kind of vocational training. People can do degree apprenticeships. And I was working on a project at the time to think about how we could bring these institutions together to make students feel like they were more part of a coordinated campus and university. And at the time, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation was in need of somebody heading up their higher education program. And anyway, I applied for the role and here I am. So it was a big career change for me. And I've had to learn so much about the circular economy, but also about how higher education works, because I'd gone to university in South Africa, which works differently to the UK, which works differently to the US, which works differently to lots of countries around the world. So that's kind of my potted journey from starry-eyed wanting to be a doctor when I was 18 to that would have been a disastrous idea, and actually really finding something that I'm particularly passionate about.
I'm surprised that I've never spoken to you about that before until now. I had no idea that you were originally going to be a doctor. So yeah, you really touched on a key point, I think, of giving university students the opportunity to sort of take their ambition that really does start to grow quickly once you're a student in college. I know that I jumped onto a lot of different organizations when I started, but there's always that gap between interest and application. And it really seems like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is able to sort of help elevate the ideas that a lot of students are nowadays, especially, really putting effort behind. So it's great that you're able to find yourself in a position where you can sort of help facilitate these activities that might not get the support that they would otherwise.
Yeah, it's been really fantastic. I mean, I think it's safe to say when I came into this role 2.5 years ago, we were really focused on kind of teaching and research in the circular economy. But what we've really seen over the last 2.5 years is how students really would like to do more in this space, and seeing universities starting to connect their teaching with how they're managing their campuses and providing opportunities for students to actually apply their theoretical knowledge from the classroom on their campus has been really exciting to see. And we see that all the time, which is great.
Yeah, and I would imagine, I mean, I'm sure many more universities in the UK participating and working with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation than here in the States. But I really do think once we are able to sort of grow the interest in the circular economy here, that we're going to see that universities will really start to partner with organizations like yourself, because it's not only a really great way for them to begin recruiting students by saying, hey, we have these opportunities available. We partner with the leading groups on this sort of effort, but it's also a really good financial decision for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things really for universities that we hear from them. So one is that obviously moving to managing their own organizations in a more circular manner is going to give them returns in terms of financial returns on the bottom line. But actually, one of the biggest draw cards is that young people are really now looking at the credentials and the sustainability or circular credentials of the institutions where they want to study. And there's lots of research that's shown that sort of 60-70% of students are now choosing their academic institution based on its work in sustainability or circular economy. So I think to not be thinking about this puts you in a very uncompetitive place, actually.
Yeah, and I work with a lot of universities just through their master planning processes as well as individual building construction. And there's always that element that the student being a key stakeholder, because they're eventually going to be deciding where they're going to go. So if you can offer programs to help support circular economy or sustainability, I mean, that's really going to attract a lot of students, I feel like. And you've been involved in working with quite a few universities. But what always amazes me about Ellen MacArthur Foundation is you don't just work with universities. You have a wide range of folks at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation who are working on food or cities or fashion.
Yeah.
So day to day, what exactly does your role look like while working at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation?
Well, I think working at the foundation, let's go back to what the foundation is here for, shall we? So it's been around for about 11 years now, set up by Dame Ellen MacArthur, as I said, to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. And I think one of the things that sets us apart from a number of different organizations that work in the sustainability space is that we've always been really clear that the circular economy is not only about the right outcomes for operating within planetary boundaries, but that it really is an economic proposition too. And when it was set up, it was really clear that if this is going to work for an economy, the players that need to be involved need to be those that are the biggest operators in the economy. So business and industry became really important for us to work with. And as a foundation, we've set out to really engage with some of the world's largest corporations, businesses, industries. And you just need to go to our website and have a look at kind of some of the 2,000 partners that we have, that we work with, to show that there is huge appetite in the business community for moving towards circular products, circular business models. But then equally, businesses can only make decisions within legislative or policy frameworks. And so we also work really closely with governments and cities from around the world and institutions such as the World Economic Forum, etc., because we know that we need to be shifting kind of policies. We need to shift strategies at national, regional and local levels to be able to enable the right conditions for the circular economy to be applied. So business and cities and governments have always been really important. And then I guess my area of work comes in where we say, well, hang on a moment, we can't do any of this if people don't even know what the circular economy is. And so we've done, a lot of work over the last 10 years to not only work with the current workforce, and we provide all sorts of access routes into professional development for the businesses in our network, but also then working with universities and increasingly with the kind of under 18s as well. So how do we start to instill a knowledge of the circular economy and to start to shift the mindsets of young people who are coming up and who will be that workforce of the future? So actually they're going into their jobs with this completely different approach to how the economy can work, and are able to execute things in a far easier manner, and it's far more kind of intuitive for them. So across the organization, we have these sort of three areas that we work with. And then you're right, we needed to take a systemic approach. So it's no good to just be trying to clean up the problems at the end of the pipe. We need to really look at like whole systems. And so we've taken a number of material flows, and we work in food, plastics, fashion, a little bit in the built environment, in looking at how we can fundamentally transform the systems around those different material flows. And I think if you've been watching the news, Kyle, you would have seen that the UN Global Plastics Treaty idea was endorsed.
Yeah, I just saw that.
Yeah, and I mean, that has been largely based on the Plastics Pact that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has established with local leaders. There's 12 of them now around the world, and our work in plastics has been hugely successful in terms of changing the way the system is operating. So I think, we'd like to think we've had great success, certainly in plastics. And if you look at our jeans redesign program and thinking through how you can redesign jeans to be circular, we've had lots of success. And next on our list is how do we introduce a circular design for food. So we work with global players. We tackle a number of different material flows. And I suppose a day in my life is looking at how can research support all of this? How can we get universities to do what one big university in London is doing, and that's building circular economy into a compulsory undergraduate first year program. So like every single student that goes through that university will know what the circular economy is. How do I work with organizations like Lego and get them to think about building circular economy into their massive education platforms? So life in my world is quite exciting. I get to work.
Pretty diverse, it sounds like.
It's so diverse. And I think because education touches so many different facets of life, right? It crops up everywhere. And so I feel really lucky that I get to talk to some incredible people from all over the world and talk about how are we going to make the world a much better place.
Right. Yeah, and you touched on a really great point that comes up a lot in my work, is this idea of a living laboratory and incorporating research into operations of a campus.
Yeah.
We're finding more and more, as I'm working with universities here in the US, that we are utilizing energy, not just energy dashboards, but really data that is being pulled from certain education realms. And that is actually then sort of influencing how buildings are operating. So if we can have an entire dashboard at the entry of a building and at key points sort of showing what data is being pulled from that building, that really does influence how folks act and what decisions they make. So I can only imagine on a larger scale utilizing sort of research as a motivation for sort of student action. I mean, there has to be so much success around that.
There is, although I mean, it's interesting because you and I sit here and we can absolutely see the scalability of that, and how every university really should be using its students and its research capacity to be able to help their own operations. And whilst there is quite a lot out there, there's not nearly as much as I think there is the potential to have. So that is an area where I think universities are doing so much in teaching circular economy and researching circular economy, but they also don't always think about how can that research be done on our own campus to help us turn our campus into being more circular. So I think that's an area where I would love to see a huge amount more work being done in that space.
There's the opportunity that is on campus itself, but sort of working with entire life cycles, you can't just look at what's on the university to what they can manage. But how do you then, while working with universities and different institutions, Are you taking part in sort of identifying which stakeholders that they're working with outside of the university or Lego, for instance? Are you working with their outside partners as well?
So sometimes we do, but we provide more than us doing the work directly with them. We actually just provide a facilitation network connecting platform. So quite a lot of what we do is in our formal network is that we get businesses and universities in the same room together and say, right, business A has this problem. University B has these researchers. How can we put you together to help solve some of those challenges? And actually, there's a piece of work that we finished, it must have been 2020 now, on creating a circular procurement framework. And that was a collaboration between Exeter University and Philips, for example, as a company. And we then picked up the learnings from that and turned it into a toolkit. So we do quite a lot to provide that space in which academic institutions and businesses can come together and can actually identify ways that they can work together. We had a great example where it's not just businesses, actually. In London, for example, the local, what do you call it? The GLA, the Greater London Authority, which is the Mayor's Authority, and their circular economy arm called London, utilised one of the master's researchers at University College London to map food waste flows across London. And that's really helped drive some data and drive changes and recommendations that London have been able to work with. So we try and create this environment where businesses and cities and governments have access to universities already working in this space, and vice versa. And by the same token, university researchers may be looking at a specific thing in the circular economy, and they will then go out to companies within our network and say, we have this theory. Anybody willing to try it with us? And we've had a lot, success in what we call collaborative projects in that space as well.
So for you, since you have so much experience helping higher education facilities eliminate waste on campus, I'd love to get an idea or some insight from you on sort of what you consider to be the easiest steps, the low-hanging fruit, the no-brainers for institutions to not only use their resources more efficiently, but as you've pointed out very recently, not just efficiently, but effectively. Yeah. So before we do that, you really brought this idea up that I'd like to talk about a little bit. You said sometimes being efficient isn't the only goal, and you referenced Brandgart's cherry tree as an example. Could you sort of outline what the difference between resource efficiency and resource effectiveness is?
I can. I mean, and I think nature is always a great example for this. So Brandgart says about a cherry tree, a cherry tree goes into blossom. If it was going to be efficient, it would just produce enough blossoms for it to kind of produce the seeds to reproduce itself within whatever land was available.
Right.
But actually what it does, it is effective rather than efficient, because it produces thousands of blossoms, right? Some of them will go on to become new cherry trees. Some of them will go on to become cherries. But actually, most of them will probably fall on the ground, and they will rot and become fertilizer for the ground around the tree, helping to keep the system in which that tree lives thriving and nutrient rich. So for me, it's a really great way of understanding it. That tree is incredibly effective at keeping itself going. Right. If it only produced enough blossoms to be efficient at being a cherry tree, it would fail, because it ultimately would die, because the ground around it, the system in which it lives, would not continue to be fed with loads of nutrients. And I always think that's a really nice example. So you can drive efficiencies, and you can make your business as efficient as possible, and that can be circular or not. But actually, sometimes it's not effective, and sometimes being effective and delivering, say, more than you need to, but because it gives you a better outcome and creates a better space within the system, it is better to be effective than it is to be efficient.
That's a great breakdown, and there's a thousand different things I could respond with, but one of the things is really one of the key principles of permaculture, as you know, is capture resources while they're abundant. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like that's what the cherry tree is doing. It has the capacity to produce as much as it does, because it's absorbing all of that solar radiation that it possibly can. And so, like you said, if it was just efficient, it would only absorb the radiation that it needs to produce what it needs. But it's not. It's able to produce more than it needs, and therefore produce eventual fertilizer for itself. So it's sort of a tie into the idea of resiliency as well. So if there is a reason it can't necessarily produce as much as it typically would on an annual year, it already has sort of that build-up buffer that it can now rely on. So I think effectiveness and efficiency, that is definitely going to be a message that I try and extend into my work as well. But that is a great summary, and pinpointing the differences between those, I think, is really key. So thank you for that.
No problem. I think I'd add a little bit to that, Kyle, which is the word regenerative, the word restorative. You're putting more in than you're taking out. And I think for me, that's the big thing. I think a lot of the time when we talk about being sustainable or being efficient, we're talking about doing less bad, right?
Right.
Okay. So the circular economy is so clear that we also have to be regenerative. We have to do better. And I think one of the things that we find, particularly with young people, actually, with things like eco-anxiety going on, is the positive message of the circular economy, which is really about saying that there is a way that you can do things that make something better rather than just doing less bad. We find that positive spin really resonates with people, particularly young people, who need to hear positive messages about the environment and that it's not all doom and gloom.
You're spot on, which is really the reason the podcast is called Don't Call It Sustainable, because the circular economy isn't aiming to just be sustainable. It's not looking to break even. It has this idea that you can break even, but that's not the ultimate goal. We can go beyond sustainable. We can look towards regenerative solutions that not only meet our needs of today, but actually make it easier for future generations to meet their own needs. That's really what regenerative is all about. It's sort of making up for the mistakes of the past as well, to a certain extent. So that distinction again between sustainable and regenerative, that's so critical when I'm trying to explain to folks what the circular economy is all about. And it makes me shudder a bit when I see folks calling the circular economy just sustainable. It's not. So that's, again, going back to the terminology involved. I hate to think that in the future the circular economy is just becoming a buzzword like sustainable is. And I'm already seeing hints of it where companies are calling a process circular. They produce a circular product. But what they essentially are saying most of the time is that the product that they are producing was made from 100% recycled content. But that doesn't necessarily address what is going to happen to that product later in its life. Are you offering a buyback program? Do you have partners that will take this product once it stops working and send it to a new use? Or is there opportunities to repair it, to reuse it, to share it? There's so much that is kind of at stake here when it comes to terminology and making sure that we're speaking about this the right way, just to make sure that the fate of circular economy isn't the same as what sustainability is today, where it can pretty much be stretched and used for whatever you want.
Yeah, and I think, we struggle with that. I think there's you can talk to people about the circular economy as a framework for meeting whatever vocabulary needs they are wanting to. So I'll give you an example for that. So a lot of universities, and I think you mentioned it, really talking about net zero, carbon neutrality. They're talking about being carbon positive. And, we did some work and released a report called Completing the Picture back in 2019, which shows that without moving to a circular economy and without thinking about the way that we produce and use goods, you're only going to get 55% of the way there in terms of carbon neutrality if you're just looking at kind of energy. So there is definitely something about using the language that whoever your audience is using and reinforcing that, moving towards a circular economy is definitely part of the way of getting there.
Right.
So I think we certainly have talked quite a bit around how the circular economy is a is a tool, a framework, an approach for meeting net zero. If you move to a circular economy, by default, your thing or your approach will be sustainable.
Right.
So there's definitely something in there about saying, absolutely, I agree with you, like the language is tricky. But I think we also recognize that sometimes you need to meet people at where they are in their language journey, in their vocab journey. And showcasing how the circular economy is a way of achieving that it can be equally as powerful.
That's a very good point. And I can't tell you how many times I've avoided using the word circular or sustainable and instead just talking about outcomes. That makes it a lot easier for institutions I work with to not immediately put up sort of that shield across their face of not really wanting to hear about sustainability anymore. Outcomes is a great way. And so you make a really good point of referencing the circular economy as sort of that framework that is beneficial for universities to look at to start to address food waste on campus or energy or buildings. And what was the percentage you said? 55% is just tied to operational?
No, well, 45% of kind of greenhouse gas emissions is really tied to the way that we make and use products. So you're only going to get halfway there if you're just tackling kind of energy stuff. So really, we need to totally rethink the way that we make and use products, which is really what we're talking about in the circular economy. So yeah, it's got a huge part to play in meeting that 1.5 degree target,
Right. That's a really key figure to talk about here for a second, because whenever I'm working with a university, they usually have a climate action plan of some sort that covers this idea that we need to get to carbon neutrality. But what they're really talking about is the carbon tied to energy and operations. They're not talking about embodied carbon, because when you're looking at a building, the ratio of carbon involved for the building versus the energy use over its lifetime, they're not even close. There's so much more carbon tied to operations than there is the actual building. So it's interesting to hear that figure.
Yeah. No, it's quite, I think people forget about, the impact on climate of the amount of food waste. They forget about the impact on climate of the amount of textiles and fashion. And, universities have a role to play in all of this.
So I'd like to take some time to really sort of come up with some practical solutions we can share with folks who are listening in. What can they do to make an impact? How can they use the circular economy framework to make a change? And so I thought it'd be really nice to have you provide us with some examples, preferably of projects that you're working on right now or have worked on in the past. Just starting out by discussing eliminating waste. What are some easy steps that universities and institutions can take to really begin eliminating waste on campus? Not recycling, but eliminating waste before it even needs recycled.
So one of my favorite examples, and a number of institutions have started doing this, is there's technology out there that you attach to the food waste bins in canteens and in halls. And they measure exactly how much food waste is going into the bins. And what I love about this is that it collects loads of data. So it will tell you on a Tuesday, I don't know, like 25 kilograms of fries ended up in the bin with 5 kilograms of cucumber and, 3 kilograms of chicken, or whatever it is.
Right.
But actually, the people who are then running those canteens and halls can start to make some really fantastic decisions so that they can design out that food waste even coming into that bin in the first place. And, Bristol University have done that in their halls. I know London School of Economics are doing it as well. And there's technology like Winnow, which is one of our emerging innovators, or Chef's Eye technology. And I really like that. In Bristol University, they totally and utterly redesigned how the food was set out. They allowed students to take their own portions rather than portioning up themselves, and they found that they took less. They discovered that lots of students didn't eat salad, so they didn't put out so much, but I don't know how I feel about that.
No.
But I guess the point is, until you can understand where your waste is coming from, you can't really make any decisions to change it. But so I love that one, in that there is tech out there that helps you really understand the data behind food waste. And then once you've you've made some menu changes, or you've redesigned how you're going to set the food out, you've looked at portion control, all of that kind of stuff, you will still have some waste. And then it's thinking through, right, how do I compost that? Where does that compost go? How do I get it back on campus? Can I use that to start growing food on campus? So that actually we are dialing down the number of food miles from food brought in from other places. So we're taking the carbon out of that. How can we bring our food in using electric vehicles or bicycles?
Right.
So there's all sorts of things around kind of food waste that I think is a really great place to start. And it also, I think, in our work, we've seen that students are really passionate about food. There's another university in London, Imperial College, that has a packaging-free food section in their student union, so you can take in your own container and they buy in bulk, and you can buy your own rice and pasta and so sort of your dry goods. So you're eliminating the need for plastic waste.
Right.
And it's the same with water coolers and water bottles. So you can do away completely with bottled water and store water coolers, and just say you bring your own water bottle, and you actually design out that the need for plastic water bottles and therefore the waste that they accumulate on campus, and then you don't have to deal with it. So for me, food is a really cool place to start.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like one of the quick wins, I think.
Yeah, and you made a good point by identifying that the very first step that these institutions are taking is to get the data tied to what their current use patterns are.
Yeah.
Because only when you get that information can you really start to identify opportunities to eliminate waste and really figure out how much waste is costing you. That's one of the key points that I try and focus on is waste does have a cost. So if you get rid of it ahead of time, you're essentially saving yourself the pain down the road. Those are great examples of eliminating waste before it even is created. And you even touched on sort of the next principle, which is circulating materials by addressing the idea of composting your own food waste.
Yeah.
Are there any good examples that you could provide, or any institutions you want to name that are really leading the charge on circulating materials, whether that is through composting food or other programs?
Well, actually, I thought I'd touch on another one for this, actually, because another one of our kind of emerging innovators at the foundation is an organization called Reaply, based in the States, so based just near Chicago. And they are, again, a tech platform. But basically what they do is they help one part of university tell other parts of the university what they have that's excess. So it's basically like if you think of Facebook Marketplace, like you wanted to sell something, you've got a bookcase that you no longer need, you put it up on Facebook Marketplace, somebody says, I'll have that, and you keep that product in use. So Reaply has been designed specifically to support resource sharing. So, for example, the geography department is refurbishing a classroom or a lecture theatre. They've got desks and chairs that they no longer need. Rather than sending those to landfill, which not only is bad for the environment, but also comes at a cost because institutions have to pay for to have their rubbish taken away. They can then put that up on the Reaply platform. It gets matched with, I don't know, the mathematics department who's going, oh, goodness, actually, we were in need of another 20 desks for X, Y, and Z. And so they keep those products circulating. I know in a number of places, they've also set up like repair and refurbish centers where furniture can go and students can help by refurbishing it and repairing it, and then it goes back out through this platform. So I think there are some really interesting, tech platforms that enable resource sharing in a way that means that people are saving money because they don't have to procure new stuff. B, the institution is saving money because it doesn't have to pay for stuff to go landfill. And of course, the bonus in all of that is that we're keeping that embodied carbon out of the environment. So I think that's a really great example. There are lots of universities, MIT is one of them, that does big clothing swaps. So people can bring all the clothing that they don't want. They will set aside some space and they have like big clothing swaps. I know a lot of universities do end of term, like dorm clear out. So people can put all their stuff out and the next incoming students can buy it off them. And to me, again, those are easy things that it's really not that difficult to set up, and it's a good place to start. And I think one of the things that we see is that this can be really overwhelming. This need to be sustainable or net zero or circular, whichever language you happen to be using, can feel really overwhelming. And then you often don't know where to start. But actually, it's a journey. Not every organization is able to go from completely linear to completely circular overnight. And there is a journey. And building confidence and engaging your students and using them to collect data and do your research for you. And starting with these small kind of quick wins will really help mobilize the whole organization.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you were able to provide so many examples, because usually the first step that I see universities taking when they are wanting to look at material waste is they will just simply focus on the recycling initiatives. So they'll make sure that the bins are available, that the graphics are updated to make it easy for people to recycle. But so many things you can do upstream to prevent the need to recycle in the first place and keep materials in use and maintain the embodied carbon and energy that is tied to those products. We've covered eliminate waste. We've touched on circulate materials.
We
The
have.
last principle is regenerate natural systems, which really ties into the first two to some degree. But what examples do you have to share that really elevates this idea of regenerating natural systems?
So, I mean, I think my favorite examples are some of the ones that, again, like a really easy thing to do. How do you start to give space over on campus that's less about mown lawns and is more about increasing biodiversity, is less about paved walkways and more about, can we carve out a space for growing food? I mean, there's some really great examples. Again, Bristol University, their veterinary science school, they created one of their kind of peri-urban farmlands where there is runoff from a dairy farm that is not great for the environment. So they created what's called an urban drainage system, which basically takes the drainage that comes off these farms and takes it through a series of reed beds, which filter out all the bad stuff and puts good stuff back into the environment. And not only does that help deal with some of the waste runoff that's coming out of the agricultural farmlands, but it's also created habitat for nature. So you look at it now, and there's ducks and geese and frogs and goodness knows what else, and it's a really great place for people to be, and it offers an environment then where the veterinary science students can go and study these creatures. And so, again, connecting that, like regenerating nature with another part of the university that is studying. And it's just, those stories they're all out there.
Right.
And I think it's really about thinking through how are you using your land and what are you using it for. But also don't forget that regenerating nature is not just about what you plant and how we make space for, how we put things back in nature, but it's also about leaving space for nature. So, for example, if you are sharing resources, desks, petri dishes, glasses, stethoscope, whatever your resources are, and you're sharing them rather than putting them in landfill, and also rather than creating the need for more virgin materials to come out of the ground to make those things, then you're leaving space for nature. It might not be on your campus, but you're doing that little bit to leave space somewhere else for nature to thrive. So there's a combination there around, like you said,
Right.
back to those first two, where if we design our waste, there's less waste going into the environment, so nature can thrive. If we circulate products and materials, there's less call on virgin materials, so that leaves space for nature to thrive. And then regenerating natural systems is really about us saying there's a lot that we can do to help nature thrive by making sure that we plant the right things, we use our land appropriately, and we help rebuild natural soils and help really put nutrients back into the ground.
I could not come up with a better summary myself. So with that, I think we will end this episode, but this has been such a good opportunity to review the 3 principles of the circular economy, discuss the framework a little more and review some examples, but also address circular economy on a much larger perspective. So I very much look forward to seeing what you continue to do at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Carl. It's been an absolute pleasure.
To listen to even more episodes of the Don't Call It Sustainable podcast, check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Also, follow us on Instagram at Don't Call It Pod. To learn more about our work at the Circular Economy Studio, follow us on LinkedIn and visit our website at circulareconomy.studio. For sponsorship opportunities or questions, email us directly at info@circulareconomy.studio.